Sarah Martinez never imagined that her morning jog around the military base would change her life forever. As the early sun painted the sky in soft orange hues, she ran past the flagpole where Old Glory waved proudly in the gentle breeze. The sound of her running shoes hitting the pavement echoed through the quiet base, creating a steady rhythm that matched her determined heartbeat. At 28 years old, Sarah had already broken more barriers than most people face in a lifetime. She was the first woman in her family to join the military, the first Latina to graduate top of her class at the prestigious Military Intelligence Academy. And now, she was about to become the first female officer to lead the most classified operations unit in the entire armed forces. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind as she ran. "Mija, when the world tells you that you don't belong somewhere, that's exactly where you need to be." These words had carried her through countless challenges, from growing up in a small Texas border town where opportunities were scarce, to surviving the brutal training that had made grown men quit and go home crying. The base was just waking up as Sarah completed her 5th mile. Soldiers were beginning their morning routines, and she could smell coffee brewing from the mess hall. She waved at Sergeant Johnson, who was raising the flag for the daily ceremony. He saluted her respectfully, something that still felt surreal after years of fighting for recognition in a male-dominated world. Sarah's phone buzzed against her arm. A text message from her commanding officer, Colonel Adams. "Report to my office immediately after PT. Important news." Her heart raced, but not from the running anymore. Today was supposed to be the day she received her official assignment to Operation Nightfall, the most secret mission the military had undertaken in decades. As she jogged back to her quarters, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her here. Her father had worked double shifts at the factory to pay for her education, never complaining even when his hands were raw from the machinery. Her mother had sewn her first military uniform by hand because they couldn't afford to buy one. Every step of her military career had been earned through blood, sweat, and tears. The shower in her small quarters ran cold, as usual, but Sarah didn't mind. She had learned to find comfort in discomfort, strength in struggle. As she put on her perfectly pressed uniform, she caught her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was no longer the scared 18-year-old who had first walked through the recruitment office doors. This was a battle-tested officer who had proven herself in 3 different combat zones. Her medals caught the light as she adjusted her jacket. The Purple Heart from her service in Afghanistan, where she had saved 6 wounded soldiers while under heavy fire. The Distinguished Service Cross from Iraq, where her intelligence work had prevented a major terrorist attack. Each piece of metal represented not just her own sacrifice, but the faith that others had placed in her abilities. Colonel Adams' office was located in the most secure building on base. Sarah had to pass through 3 different security checkpoints, each more thorough than the last. The guards knew her well, but protocol was protocol. Her security clearance was among the highest in the military, a fact that had taken years to achieve and even more years for some people to accept. The colonel's secretary, Mrs. Patterson, looked up from her computer with a warm smile. She was a kind woman in her 60s who had worked on the base for over 30 years. "He's waiting for you, dear," she said in her gentle Southern accent. "And Sarah, whatever happens in there, remember that you've earned every opportunity that comes your way." There was something in Mrs. Patterson's voice that made Sarah's stomach tighten. The older woman had always been supportive, but today there was a weight to her words that felt different. Sarah knocked on the colonel's door and heard his familiar voice call out, "Come in." Colonel Adams was standing by his window, looking out at the training grounds where new recruits were running drills. He was a tall man with silver hair and kind eyes, someone who had mentored Sarah throughout her career. When he turned around, however, his usual smile was missing. "Sit down, Martinez," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. The formality in his voice was unusual. Normally, he called her Sarah when they were alone. "Sir, is everything all right?" she asked, settling into the chair while maintaining perfect posture. Colonel Adams sat down heavily in his chair, and for the first time since she had known him, he looked older than his 55 years. He picked up a folder from his desk, one that Sarah recognized as her personnel file, and opened it slowly. "Sarah, your record is exemplary. In 20 years of military service, I've never seen an officer with your combination of intelligence, courage, and leadership ability. You've exceeded every expectation, surpassed every goal, and earned the respect of everyone who has served with you." "Thank you, sir. I've always tried to give my best to serve our country." Which is why what I'm about to tell you makes absolutely no sense. Colonel Adams closed the folder and looked directly at her. General Harrison has decided to remove you from Operation Nightfall. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She had spent 2 years preparing for this mission, had been specifically chosen by the Pentagon for her unique skills, and had already been briefed on the most sensitive aspects of the operation. This wasn't just a career setback, it was professional devastation. Sir, I don't understand. Has something changed with my security clearance? Is there a problem with my performance? No, Sarah, your clearance is solid and your performance has been flawless. This decision came from outside our normal chain of command. Sarah felt her world tilting sideways. She had faced enemy fire without flinching, had made split-second decisions that saved lives, but this unexpected betrayal left her feeling vulnerable in a way that combat never had. What reason did General Harrison give? Colonel Adams hesitated, and Sarah could see the anger in his eyes. He cited concerns about unit cohesion and questioned whether the team was ready to work with a female officer in such a high-stakes environment. The excuse was so transparent, so obviously discriminatory that Sarah almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she felt a familiar fire building in her chest, the same determination that had carried her through every other obstacle in her path. Sir, with respect, that's complete nonsense. I've worked with this team for 6 months. We've trained together, deployed together, and they've specifically requested that I remain their intelligence lead. I know, Sarah. I've already submitted a formal protest through proper channels, but General Harrison outranks me. His decision stands unless. Unless what, sir? Unless you're willing to fight this. It won't be easy, and it could damage your career if you lose. But I believe you have grounds for a formal complaint. Sarah thought about her grandmother's words again. This was exactly the moment her grandmother had prepared her for, the moment when the world would try to push her back into a smaller space. But she had never been good at staying in small spaces. What would you recommend, sir? Colonel Adams leaned forward, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. There are people higher up the chain who believe in what you represent, people who understand that the future of our military depends on officers like you. If you're willing to take the risk, I can make some calls. What kind of risk are we talking about? General Harrison is old school, Sarah. He has powerful friends and a long memory. If you challenge him directly and lose, he could make sure you never get another high-profile assignment. Your career could stagnate in desk jobs and administrative positions. Sarah stood up and walked to the window where Colonel Adams had been standing. Outside, she could see the new recruits still running their drills. Some of them were women, young soldiers who looked up to her as an example of what was possible in their military careers. How could she let them down by backing away from this fight? Sir, I didn't join the military to play it safe. If I back down now, what message does that send to every woman who comes after me? Colonel Adams smiled for the first time since she had entered his office. I was hoping you'd say that. There's something else you should know, Sarah. This isn't the first time General Harrison has tried to remove qualified women from high-level positions. There are other officers who have been documenting his pattern of behavior. You mean I'm not alone in this? Far from it. But you might be the first one with enough rank, enough credibility, and enough courage to make a case that actually sticks. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just about her career anymore. It was about changing a system that had held back talented women for far too long. What do I need to do? First, we document everything. Every conversation, every email, every witness to General Harrison's decision-making process. Then, we build a case that's so airtight that even his powerful friends won't be able to ignore it. As Sarah left Colonel Adams' office that morning, she had no idea that her fight against General Harrison would eventually reach the highest levels of government. She couldn't have imagined that within a week, her case would be sitting on the president's desk, or that the phone call that would change everything was already being planned. All she knew was that she was ready to fight for her place in the military she loved, no matter what the cost might be. The meeting room in the Pentagon felt colder than usual as Sarah sat across from General Harrison for the first time. 3 days had passed since Colonel Adams had broken the news, and now she was face to face with the man who threatened to derail her career. The general was exactly what she had expected. Tall, stern, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that seemed to look right through her. Officer Martinez, General Harrison said, not bothering to look up from the papers on his desk. I understand you have concerns about my decision regarding Operation Nightfall. Sarah kept her voice steady and professional. Yes, sir. I'm requesting clarification on the reasoning behind my removal from the mission. General Harrison finally looked at her, and Sarah could see the dismissive judgment in his expression. It was a look she had encountered many times before, the look of someone who had already decided she didn't belong in the room. Officer Martinez, military operations require absolute trust and seamless teamwork. I have concerns about the team's ability to function effectively with certain distractions present. The word distractions hung in the air like a slap. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she maintained her composure. Sir, could you be more specific about these concerns? My evaluations from the team members have all been exemplary. Evaluations don't tell the whole story, Martinez. In high-pressure situations, soldiers need to focus on the mission, not on protecting female colleagues who might not be able to handle the physical and emotional demands. Sarah leaned forward slightly. General, with respect, I've served in 3 combat zones. I've been under fire more times than I can count. My ability to handle pressure has been proven repeatedly. General Harrison waved his hand dismissively. Combat zones are one thing, Martinez, but Operation Nightfall is different. This mission requires a level of physical strength and mental toughness that, frankly, women aren't equipped for. The conversation continued for 20 more minutes, with General Harrison making increasingly obvious discriminatory statements, while Sarah documented every word in her memory. By the time she left his office, she had enough evidence to support a formal complaint, but she also understood that she was up against someone who wasn't going to change his mind through reason or evidence. That afternoon, Sarah met with Captain Jennifer Walsh, another female officer who had faced similar treatment from General Harrison 2 years earlier. Jennifer was a helicopter pilot with over 15 years of service, someone whose record was just as impressive as Sarah's. He used almost the exact same words with me, Jennifer said as they sat in a quiet corner of the base coffee shop. Said that having women in combat roles created distractions and put missions at risk. I was supposed to lead a rescue operation in Somalia, but he had me reassigned to a desk job at the last minute. Why didn't you fight it? Jennifer's expression grew sad. I tried, but I didn't have enough support. My commanding officer agreed with Harrison's decision, and I was told that if I pursued a formal complaint, it would damage unit morale and harm my career prospects. Sarah felt anger building in her chest, not just for herself, but for Jennifer and all the other qualified women who had been pushed aside by men like General Harrison. What happened to the Somalia mission? Sarah asked. It failed. The officer they chose instead of me didn't have the experience with rescue operations that I had. 3 hostages died who might have been saved if someone with proper training had been leading the mission. The weight of Jennifer's words settled over Sarah like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about discrimination anymore. It was about lives that could be lost when qualified officers were replaced with less capable ones for reasons that had nothing to do with merit. Over the next few days, Sarah discovered that General Harrison's pattern of behavior went back years. She spoke with Captain Maria Rodriguez, who had been denied a promotion despite being the top candidate. She talked with Major Susan Chen, who had been transferred out of an elite unit after General Harrison decided that women complicated the unit dynamics. Each story was similar, and each time, the women had been told that fighting the decision would harm their careers. Most had chosen to stay quiet and accept lesser assignments rather than risk everything on a battle they weren't sure they could win. But Sarah was different. She had grown up fighting for everything she had achieved, and she wasn't about to stop now. With Colonel Adams' help, she began building a formal case against General Harrison, documenting his pattern of discriminatory behavior and gathering statements from the women who had been affected. The breakthrough came when Sergeant First Class Rebecca Turner approached Sarah after hearing about her case. Rebecca was a tough, no-nonsense soldier who had served under General Harrison 5 years earlier. "I've been waiting for someone like you to come along," Rebecca said during their private meeting. "Someone with enough rank and credibility to take him on." "What do you mean?" Rebecca pulled out a small recording device. 5 years ago, General Harrison made some comments that I recorded during a staff meeting. comments that made it very clear what he really thinks about women in the military. Sarah's heart raced as Rebecca played the recording. General Harrison's voice was unmistakable as he spoke to a room full of male officers about his concerns regarding women in combat roles. The problem with women in the military is that they're always trying to prove themselves. His voice crackled through the small speaker. They take unnecessary risks, they get emotional under pressure, and they distract the men from focusing on their jobs. Mark my words, gentlemen, putting women in leadership positions in combat units is going to get people killed. The recording continued for several more minutes, with General Harrison making increasingly damaging statements about female soldiers. Rebecca had captured nearly an entire meeting where the general had outlined his philosophy about keeping women out of critical military positions. "Why didn't you use this before?" Sarah asked. "Because I was a sergeant going up against a general. No one would have listened to me and my career would have been over. But you're different, Sarah. You have rank, you have an exemplary record, and you have support from people who matter." With the recording as evidence, Sarah's case became much stronger. Colonel Adams helped her prepare a formal complaint that detailed not just her own situation, but the pattern of discrimination that had affected multiple female officers over several years. The complaint worked its way through the military's chain of command, but progress was slow. General Harrison had powerful allies who were reluctant to move against him without overwhelming evidence. Sarah began to worry that her case would get buried in military bureaucracy. Then, unexpectedly, help came from an unexpected source. Congresswoman Elizabeth Morgan, who served on the House Armed Services Committee, had been following reports of discrimination in the military. When word of Sarah's case reached her office, she immediately took interest. Congresswoman Morgan was a former military officer herself, someone who had faced similar challenges during her own service 20 years earlier. She arranged a private meeting with Sarah to discuss the situation. "Officer Martinez," the Congresswoman said as they met in her Washington office, "your case represents something much larger than one assignment or one general's prejudices. This is about the future of our military and whether we're going to use all of our best people or continue to waste talent because of outdated thinking." Sarah was impressed by the Congresswoman's direct approach and obvious understanding of military culture. "Ma'am, I appreciate your interest, but I'm concerned about the appearance of political interference in military matters." "I understand your concern, but this isn't about politics. This is about ensuring that our military operates according to its own stated principles of merit-based advancement and equal opportunity." Congresswoman Morgan explained that she had been investigating reports of systematic discrimination in various branches of the military. General Harrison's name had come up in several different contexts, always related to decisions that seemed to unfairly impact female officers. "I want to help you, Sarah, but I need to know that you're prepared for what's coming. When we challenge someone like General Harrison, the response is going to be swift and brutal. He'll try to destroy your reputation, question your motives, and make you regret ever speaking up." Sarah thought about all the women who had been forced to accept lesser assignments, all the potential that had been wasted, all the missions that might have succeeded with better leadership. "Ma'am, I've never backed down from a fight that was worth having. If we don't stand up to this behavior now, when will we?" The Congresswoman smiled. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. I'm going to make some calls to people who have the authority to ensure your case gets the attention it deserves." What Sarah didn't know was that one of those calls would go directly to the White House, to an aide who briefed the president on military personnel matters. The president had been increasingly concerned about reports of discrimination in the armed forces and had specifically asked to be informed about cases that might require high-level intervention. As Sarah left the Congresswoman's office that day, she felt a mixture of hope and apprehension. She had set something in motion that was bigger than she had originally imagined, and she wasn't sure where it would lead. General Harrison, meanwhile, had learned about the formal complaint and was preparing his own response. He called a meeting with his closest allies in the Pentagon, men who shared his views about women in the military and who were prepared to help him weather this challenge to his authority. "This Martinez woman thinks she can destroy my career with a bunch of complaints from disgruntled female officers," he told the group. "We need to show her and everyone else what happens when someone tries to undermine military discipline and unit cohesion." The battle lines were being drawn, and neither side was prepared to back down. But Sarah had no idea that the most powerful person in the country was about to take a personal interest in her case, and that a single phone call would change everything. Sarah's world turned upside down when she arrived at work on Monday morning to find her security clearance suspended and her access to classified materials revoked. A cold-faced security officer handed her an official notice while her colleagues watched in uncomfortable silence. "Officer Martinez," the security officer read from his clipboard, "by order of General Harrison, your security clearance is under review pending investigation into conduct unbecoming of an officer." Sarah felt the blood drain from her face. Without her security clearance, she couldn't perform any of her duties. She was effectively suspended without being officially suspended, a clever bureaucratic maneuver that would force her to sit in an empty office while her case worked its way through the system. Colonel Adams appeared at her side within minutes of hearing the news. His face was red with anger, and Sarah could see him fighting to control his temper. "This is retaliation, pure and simple," he said once they were alone in his office. "Harrison is trying to intimidate you into dropping your complaint." "Is it working?" Sarah asked, though she already knew her answer. "Not if I know you," Colonel Adams replied with a slight smile. "But I want you to understand what you're up against. Harrison has convinced his superiors that you're a troublemaker who's trying to destroy military discipline with false accusations." Sarah sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. "What's his version of events?" "According to Harrison, you've been secretly recording conversations, building a conspiracy with other female officers to bring false charges against male commanders, and using political connections to circumvent proper military channels." The accusations were so twisted from reality that Sarah almost couldn't believe someone would take them seriously. And his superiors believe this. Some of them want to believe it because it's easier than admitting they've been tolerating discrimination. Others are genuinely concerned about the implications if Harrison's version is true. Sarah felt trapped in a nightmare where up was down and black was white. She had followed every proper channel, documented everything carefully, and presented her case through official military procedures. Now she was being painted as the villain in her own story. "Colonel, what happens if I lose this fight? What happens to my career?" Colonel Adams was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, Sarah, if Harrison wins, your military career is probably over. He'll make sure you're transferred to dead-end assignments until you get frustrated and resign." "And if I win?" "If you win, you'll have changed the military forever. You'll have proven that merit matters more than prejudice, and you'll have opened doors for every woman who comes after you." That afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected visitor. Admiral Patricia Reynolds, one of the highest-ranking women in the military, requested a private meeting. Sarah had heard of Admiral Reynolds but had never met her personally. The Admiral was a formidable woman in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a commanding presence. She had risen through the ranks during an era when female military officers faced even more barriers than they did now. "Officer Martinez," Admiral Reynolds said as they sat in a secure conference room, "I want you to understand something about the fight you've chosen to undertake. This isn't just about you or even about General Harrison. This is about whether our military is going to evolve or continue to be held back by the prejudices of the past." Sarah appreciated the Admiral's directness. "Ma'am, I never intended for this to become such a big issue. I just wanted to serve my country to the best of my abilities." "I know that, Sarah. But sometimes the biggest changes come from individuals who simply refuse to accept that the way things are is the way things have to be." Admiral Reynolds leaned forward. "I want to tell you something that's not in any official record. 20 years ago, General Harrison was involved in a similar situation with a female Navy officer named Commander Lisa Thompson. She was one of the most brilliant strategists I've ever worked with, but Harrison used his influence to have her transferred out of a critical position." "What happened to her?" "She eventually left the military, went to work in the private sector and became very successful, but we lost someone who could have made a real difference in military operations." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "How many others have there been?" "Too many," Admiral Reynolds said sadly. "But here's what makes your case different. You have something Commander Thompson didn't have: documentation, witnesses, and political support. You also have something else." "What's that?" You have a president who specifically campaigned on equality in the military, and who has been looking for an opportunity to make a statement about discrimination in the armed forces. Sarah's heart jumped. She knew the president had spoken about military equality during the campaign, but she hadn't dared to hope that her case might reach that level. "Ma'am, are you saying the president knows about my situation?" "I'm saying that there are people in Washington who understand the importance of what you're fighting for. Your case has become a test of whether our military's commitment to equality is real or just empty words." The next morning brought news that would change everything. Sarah was called to report to the office of General Patricia Hayes, the highest-ranking woman in the Army and someone who reported directly to the Secretary of Defense. General Hayes was known throughout the military as someone who was brilliant, fair, and absolutely uncompromising when it came to military standards. She had earned her position through exceptional performance, not through quotas or political pressure. "Sit down, Martinez," General Hayes said, gesturing to a chair. "I've been reviewing your case, and I want to hear your side of the story directly from you." Sarah spent the next hour recounting everything that had happened, from her original assignment to Operation Nightfall through General Harrison's attempts to remove her and the subsequent retaliation she had faced. General Hayes listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes on a legal pad. When Sarah finished, the general was quiet for several minutes. "Officer Martinez, what you're alleging is serious. If you're right, then General Harrison has violated military regulations and possibly federal law. But if you're wrong, if this is somehow a misunderstanding or an exaggeration, then you've damaged the reputation of a decorated general and created division within our ranks." "Ma'am, I understand the gravity of the situation. I have evidence to support everything I've said, and I'm prepared to face any consequences if I'm proven wrong." General Hayes opened a thick folder on her desk. "I've been conducting my own investigation into General Harrison's personnel decisions over the past 5 years. What I've found is troubling." She pulled out several documents and spread them on her desk. "These are performance evaluations, transfer orders, and promotion recommendations for female officers who have served under General Harrison's command. The pattern is unmistakable." Sarah looked at the papers and saw what the general meant. Every high-performing female officer had either been transferred to less important positions or had received negative evaluations that seemed inconsistent with their actual performance. "Ma'am, what does this mean for my case?" "It means that your case is no longer just about Operation Nightfall. It's become part of a larger investigation into systemic discrimination. The Secretary of Defense has ordered a full review of General Harrison's command decisions." Sarah felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Her case was being taken seriously at the highest levels, but that also meant the stakes had become much higher. "There's something else you need to know," General Hayes continued. "General Harrison has requested an emergency meeting with the Secretary of Defense. He's claiming that this investigation is based on a conspiracy led by female officers who want to destroy his career." "What will happen at that meeting?" "The Secretary will make a decision about how to proceed. Harrison will present his side of the story, and the Secretary will decide whether the evidence supports continued investigation or whether this matter should be dropped." That evening, Sarah sat in her small apartment, staring at the phone. She had been given permission to call her family, and she desperately wanted to hear her grandmother's voice. When her grandmother answered, Sarah could barely hold back her tears. "Abuela, I think I may have made a terrible mistake. I'm fighting against someone who's much more powerful than me, and I might lose everything." Her grandmother was quiet for a moment. "Mija, let me tell you a story about your great-grandmother. She came to this country with nothing but hope and determination. People told her she didn't belong, that she should go back where she came from. But she stayed, and she fought, and she built a life for our family." "But what if I lose, Abuela? What if I've thrown away my career for nothing?" "Sarah, you listen to me. Your great-grandmother used to say that some fights are worth having even if you lose them, because the act of fighting changes you and changes the world around you. You're not just fighting for yourself. You're fighting for every girl who dreams of serving her country." As Sarah hung up the phone, she felt her resolve strengthen. Whatever happened next, she would face it with dignity and courage. She had no way of knowing that at that very moment, the president was being briefed on her case and was preparing to make a decision that would shock everyone involved. The phone call that would change everything was already being planned. The Secretary of Defense's conference room had never felt more intimidating. Sarah sat at a long mahogany table, flanked by Colonel Adams and a military lawyer, facing General Harrison and his team of supporters. Secretary James Morrison, a former Marine general himself, presided over the meeting with the authority of someone who had spent decades making life-and-death decisions. General Harrison looked confident as he presented his case. He was a master of military protocol and political maneuvering, and he used every tool at his disposal to paint Sarah as a troublemaker who was damaging military cohesion. "Mr. Secretary," General Harrison said in his commanding voice, "Officer Martinez has violated the chain of command, recruited other female officers to support false allegations, and used political connections to circumvent proper military procedures. This kind of behavior, if tolerated, will destroy the discipline that makes our military effective." Sarah listened as General Harrison systematically attacked her character, her motives, and her methods. He made her sound like a scheming manipulator rather than an officer who had simply tried to address discrimination through proper channels. "Furthermore," Harrison continued, "Officer Martinez's psychological profile suggests she may be prone to emotional instability under pressure. The mission she was removed from requires absolute mental toughness, and I made a command decision based on legitimate concerns about her suitability." The psychological profile was a new attack, and Sarah felt her anger rising. She had never undergone any psychological evaluation that would support Harrison's claims, and she suspected he was simply fabricating evidence to support his position. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she stood and addressed the secretary directly. "Sir, General Harrison has presented a version of events that bears no resemblance to reality. I have documentation, recordings, and witness testimony that prove a pattern of discrimination against female officers under his command." She presented the evidence methodically. The recording Sergeant Turner had made, the performance evaluations that showed qualified women being given negative reviews, the transfer orders that consistently moved women out of important positions. "Sir," Sarah concluded, "this isn't about one assignment or one decision. This is about whether our military is going to live up to its stated principles of equal opportunity and merit-based advancement." Secretary Morrison asked pointed questions of both sides, and Sarah could see him weighing the evidence carefully. General Harrison's supporters vouched for his character and leadership, while Sarah's allies presented documentation of discriminatory behavior. After 3 hours of testimony and questions, Secretary Morrison called for a recess. "I need time to review all the evidence and consider the implications of both versions of events. We'll reconvene tomorrow morning for my decision." That evening, Sarah felt emotionally drained. The hearing had been brutal, with General Harrison's team attacking not just her case but her personal character. Colonel Adams took her to a quiet restaurant near the Pentagon, where they could talk without being overheard. "How do you think it went?" Sarah asked, picking at her food. "Honestly, I think Morrison is genuinely torn. Harrison made a strong case for military discipline and chain of command, but your evidence of discrimination is hard to ignore. What happens if Morrison sides with Harrison? Then your military career is effectively over, and Harrison gets the message that he can continue his discriminatory practices without consequences." Sarah nodded, already knowing the stakes. "And if Morrison sides with me? Then Harrison faces serious consequences, and we send a message throughout the military that discrimination won't be tolerated anymore." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in her bed thinking about all the women who had been pushed aside by men like General Harrison, all the talent that had been wasted, all the missions that might have succeeded with better leadership. At 3 a.m., her phone rang. The caller ID showed a Washington number she didn't recognize. "Officer Martinez, this is Janet Walsh from the White House Personnel Office. I'm calling to inform you that the President would like to speak with you tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Sarah sat up in bed, her heart racing. "I'm sorry, did you say the President wants to speak with me?" "Yes, ma'am. This is regarding your situation with General Harrison. Can you be available for a phone call at 9 a.m.? "Of course, yes, ma'am, I'll be available." After hanging up, Sarah stared at the phone in disbelief. The President of the United States wanted to speak with her personally about her case. She couldn't imagine what that meant for her situation or for the decisions Secretary Morrison would make. The next morning, Sarah sat in Colonel Adams' office, waiting for the most important phone call of her life. At exactly 9 a.m., the phone rang. "Officer Martinez, please hold for the president," came a crisp voice. A moment later, she heard the familiar voice she had only heard on television. "Officer Martinez, this is the president. I want you to know that I've been following your case closely, and I'm very impressed with your courage." "Thank you, Mr. President. I'm honored to speak with you." "Officer Martinez, I campaigned on a promise to ensure equality in our military, and your case represents exactly the kind of situation I was talking about. No officer should face discrimination based on gender, and no qualified person should be denied opportunities because of prejudice." Sarah felt her hands trembling as she held the phone. "Mr. President, I just want to serve my country to the best of my abilities." "And that's exactly what you should be able to do. I want you to know that I've spoken with Secretary Morrison about your case. The decision is still his to make, but I've made it very clear that this administration supports merit-based advancement and will not tolerate discrimination." The call lasted only a few more minutes, but its impact was immediate. Word spread quickly through the Pentagon that the president had personally intervened in Sarah's case. General Harrison's supporters began to distance themselves, and Secretary Morrison faced pressure to make the right decision. At the afternoon session, Secretary Morrison's demeanor had changed noticeably. He looked directly at General Harrison as he began his remarks. "General Harrison, after reviewing all the evidence and considering the testimony presented yesterday, I have reached a conclusion about this matter." The room was completely silent as everyone waited for the decision that would determine Sarah's future and potentially change military culture forever. "The evidence presented by Officer Martinez is compelling and well documented. The pattern of decisions affecting female officers under your command cannot be explained by performance or mission requirements alone." General Harrison's face began to redden, but he remained silent. "Furthermore," Secretary Morrison continued, "your characterization of Officer Martinez's psychological fitness and your attempts to question her motives appear to be retaliatory rather than based on legitimate concerns." Sarah felt her heart pounding as she realized which way the decision was going. "Therefore, I am ordering that Officer Martinez be immediately reinstated to Operation Nightfall with her full security clearance restored. Additionally, I am ordering a comprehensive review of personnel decisions made under your command over the past 5 years." General Harrison stood abruptly. "Mr. Secretary, this is a grave mistake that will damage military discipline and—" "General Harrison," Secretary Morrison interrupted, his voice carrying unmistakable authority, "you are dismissed from this meeting. Report to my office tomorrow morning to discuss your future in this command." As General Harrison left the room with his supporters, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and vindication. She had won, but she also understood that this victory came with its own challenges. She would now have to prove herself all over again, this time with everyone watching to see if she could live up to the expectations her case had created. Colonel Adams leaned over and whispered, "Congratulations, Sarah. You've just changed military history." But Sarah barely heard him. She was thinking about the phone call from the president and what it meant that the highest office in the land had supported her fight for equality. She was also thinking about General Harrison's expression as he left the room, and she wondered if her troubles with him were truly over. What she didn't know was that the phone call from the president had been just the beginning, and that the real test of her character and abilities was still to come. 6 months after her victory over General Harrison, Sarah stood in the Situation Room deep beneath a classified military facility, leading Operation Nightfall as it unfolded in real time. The mission she had fought so hard to join was now her responsibility, and everything she had endured seemed worth it as she coordinated the most successful intelligence operation in recent military history. "Team Alpha, confirm your position," Sarah spoke into her headset, managing multiple units simultaneously while analyzing incoming data streams on 4 different monitors. "Position confirmed, Control. We have visual on the target facility," came the response from the field team. Sarah's expertise in intelligence analysis and her ability to process multiple data sources simultaneously had proven invaluable during the 6-hour operation. The team she was supposed to distract had requested specifically that she remain their control officer for future missions. Colonel Adams watched from the back of the room as Sarah flawlessly managed the complex operation. The woman who had been deemed unsuitable for high-pressure missions was now demonstrating exactly why the president's intervention had been necessary. The operation concluded with the successful extraction of critical intelligence that would prevent a major terrorist attack. As the teams returned to base safely, Sarah felt a deep satisfaction that went beyond personal vindication. She had proven that merit should be the only factor in military assignments. 2 weeks later, Sarah received orders that surprised even her supporters. She was being promoted to lieutenant colonel and assigned to establish a new training program for intelligence officers. The program would focus on identifying and developing talent regardless of gender, race, or background. The promotion ceremony took place on a crisp autumn morning, with Sarah's family traveling from Texas to witness her achievement. Her grandmother, now in her 80s, sat in the front row wearing the purple dress she had saved for special occasions. General Patricia Hayes, who had supported Sarah throughout her ordeal, presided over the ceremony. "Lieutenant Colonel Martinez," she said as she pinned the new rank insignia on Sarah's uniform, "represents the best of what our military can be when we focus on ability rather than bias." After the ceremony, Sarah was approached by a young female cadet who was visiting the base with her ROTC unit. "Ma'am," the cadet said nervously, "I wanted to thank you. When I heard about your case, it made me believe that I could actually have a career in military intelligence." Sarah smiled, remembering her own doubts when she was that young. "What's your name?" "Cadet Jennifer Martinez, ma'am. No relation, but I like to think we're connected anyway." "We are connected, Jennifer. We're connected by the belief that service to country is more important than the prejudices of the past." The aftermath of Sarah's case had been swift and far-reaching. General Harrison had been quietly reassigned to a desk position and had retired within 6 months. The comprehensive review of his personnel decisions had revealed a pattern of discrimination that resulted in several female officers being reinstated to positions they deserved. More importantly, the case had sent a clear message throughout the military that discrimination would not be tolerated. New policies were implemented to ensure that complaints about bias were taken seriously and investigated thoroughly. Sarah's new training program became a model for other branches of the military. Young officers of all backgrounds learned that success came through merit, determination, and excellence rather than fitting into traditional molds. On the first anniversary of her confrontation with General Harrison, Sarah received an unexpected invitation to the White House. The president wanted to meet personally with the officer whose case had helped reshape military policy. The Oval Office was smaller than Sarah had imagined, but the weight of history in the room was palpable. The president greeted her warmly and gestured for her to sit across from his desk. "Lieutenant Colonel Martinez, I wanted to thank you personally for your courage. Your case helped us address issues in our military that should have been confronted years ago." "Mr. President, I was just trying to do my job. I never imagined it would lead to all of this." "That's exactly what made your case so powerful. You weren't looking for attention or trying to make a political statement. You were simply asking to be judged by your abilities rather than your gender." The president handed her a framed photograph from Operation Nightfall showing her coordinating the successful mission. "I keep this as a reminder that our military is strongest when we use all of our best people." As Sarah left the White House that day, she thought about the journey that had brought her from that morning jog on the military base to the highest office in the land. The scared young woman who had first joined the military had never imagined she would become a symbol of change. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her grandmother. "Mija, I saw you on the news at the White House. Your great-grandmother would be so proud. You found where you belonged and made room for others to belong there too." 3 years later, Sarah's training program had graduated over 500 officers who went on to serve with distinction in intelligence operations around the world. The program had become so successful that it was being replicated by allied militaries in other countries. Sarah herself had been promoted to colonel and was being considered for assignment as the first female commander of the military's premier intelligence unit. The position that had once seemed impossible for someone like her was now within reach. On a quiet Sunday morning, Sarah returned to the base where her journey had begun. She ran the same route she had taken on that fateful day when Colonel Adams had called her to his office with news that would change her life. As she passed the flagpole where Old Glory still waved proudly, Sarah reflected on the lessons she had learned. The fight for equality was never about special treatment or lowering standards. It was about ensuring that everyone had the opportunity to contribute their best efforts to something larger than themselves. She thought about General Harrison, who had eventually written her a letter acknowledging that his views had been wrong. It had taken him seeing the success of the officers he had tried to hold back to understand that his prejudices had been damaging the very military he thought he was protecting. The base was coming alive with a new day as Sarah completed her run. Young recruits were beginning their morning training, and among them she could see the faces of diversity that represented the future of the military. Women and men of all backgrounds were working together, judged only by their dedication and ability. As she walked toward her office to begin another day of training the next generation of intelligence officers, Sarah's phone rang. It was Cadet Jennifer Martinez, now Lieutenant Martinez, calling to report on her first assignment. "Colonel, I just wanted you to know that I've been selected for advanced intelligence training. They said my performance has been exemplary." Sarah smiled. "Congratulations, Jennifer. Remember, this is just the beginning. There will always be new challenges, new barriers to overcome." "I know, ma'am, but I also know that someone already proved it's possible to overcome them." After hanging up, Sarah looked at the flag flying above the base and remembered her grandmother's words about belonging. She had found her place not by fitting into someone else's definition of what a soldier should be, but by insisting that her definition deserved consideration too. The general who had tried to expel her had unknowingly set in motion changes that would outlast both of their careers. The phone call from the president had stopped him cold, but it was the courage of one officer refusing to accept discrimination that had changed everything. As Sarah entered her office to begin another day of preparing the next generation of military leaders, she carried with her the knowledge that sometimes the most important battles are fought not with weapons, but with the determination to stand up for what is right, regardless of the cost. The military she served was stronger because of that fight, and the country she protected was more secure because talent was being recognized regardless of gender. That was a victory worth every challenge she had faced along the way.